The dirt was cool and gritty beneath my knees. Each tiny stone pressed into my skin, a small, sharp reminder of my place. I kept my eyes locked on that patch of earth, on a single struggling blade of grass, because if I looked up, I would have to see their faces. I would have to see the pity in the eyes of the kind ones, and the cold, hard satisfaction in the eyes of everyone else. The entire population of Oakhaven seemed to have gathered in the village square for this spectacle. My spectacle. My mother's voice cut through the murmuring crowd, sharp and clear, designed to slice me to the bone. Look at her. 27 years old, and so desperate she would bind herself to a wanderer. A man with nothing to his name but the dust on his boots. I flinched, the words hitting with the force of a physical blow. Alara Vance, the daughter who had never been enough, was now the daughter who had finally gone too far. I had known this moment would come. Nothing good in my life was ever allowed to last. Happiness was a fleeting visitor, and my mother, Lyra, was its permanent warden. Tell them, Alara, she demanded, circling me like a hawk preparing to dive. Her shadow fell over me, blocking out the weak morning sun. Tell them all how you shamed this family. How you gave yourself to a drifter who appeared from the mist 3 months ago with nothing but worn-out clothes and a tired old horse. Tell them how you performed the ancient handfasting under the moon without my permission, without witnesses, without even the decency to tell your own mother. A fresh wave of whispers erupted from the crowd. Handfasting. The old way. It was legally binding among our kind, recognized by the ancient wolf laws that predated our civilized society, but it was considered primitive, a relic of a wilder past. It was a declaration of love that asked for no one's blessing, and for that, my mother would never forgive me. Heat crawled up my neck, burning my cheeks. But I refused to cry. I had learned that lesson in childhood. Tears were a weakness, and weakness only made Lyra sharper, crueler. They were a fuel for her anger, not a balm for my pain. Where is this mysterious woodsman of yours? A voice jeered from the back of the crowd. Did he flee when he realized he'd caught himself a burden instead of a prize? The laughter that followed was like a shower of icy needles. But then, a strange stillness fell over the square. The crowd began to part, and my heart stuttered in my chest. I knew the sound of his footsteps. Steady, unhurried. They carried a weight that seemed to bend the very air around him, a quiet authority that had always felt out of place on a simple laborer. Cale emerged from the throng of hostile faces. His show. Elders were squared, his long, dark hair tied back with a simple leather cord. His face, weathered by a life outdoors, showed no trace of fear, even surrounded by people who wanted him gone. He looked exactly like the wandering hunter they believed him to be. A worn leather vest, simple trousers, boots scarred from travel, hands calloused from hard work. To anyone watching, he was nobody. A man with nothing to offer but his labor and, in their eyes, empty promises. But when his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, found mine, my chest ached with a feeling I could not name. I saw the man who had fixed our leaking roof without ever asking for payment. The man who had carried water for me when the rope had torn my palms raw. The man who had sat with me by firelight and made me laugh, truly laugh, for the first time in years. He had made me feel seen. He had made me feel human. So, you decided to return, my mother said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I expected you to be halfway to the next valley by now. That is what men of your station do, is it not? They enjoy the fun and then disappear when reality arrives. Cale did not answer her immediately. He walked straight to where I knelt in the dirt, his gaze never leaving mine. He extended his hand, his palm scarred and strong. Get up, Alara, he said, his voice low but firm, carrying across the silent square. You do not kneel for anyone. I stared at his outstretched hand, my own trembling. It was an offer of salvation, a challenge to the entire world my mother had built around me. Slowly, tentatively, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and solid, and he pulled me to my feet. Something cracked open inside me then, a fragile shell of fear I had carried for so long. The crowd murmured, sensing the shift, understanding that Lyra's carefully orchestrated humiliation was not going according to her plan. I came to speak with you about your daughter, Cale said, turning to face my mother. His voice carried an innate authority that seemed to resonate from his very core. an authority that was deeply at odds with his borrowed clothes. Though I see you have decided a public shaming is more fitting than a private conversation. Public disgrace deserves public consequences. Lyra snapped, her composure cracking. You seduced my daughter. I asked her to be my wife, Cale corrected, his tone calm and unwavering. She said yes. We were handfasted 4 nights ago under the full moon, with the old words spoken. I understand that is not how things are typically done here in Oakhaven. But where I come from, the moon's blessing carries more weight than an elder's signature. The whispers intensified. Where he came from, that was the great mystery. And where, pray tell, is that? Lyra's mockery was a sharp, ugly thing. You have been here for months, and you have told no one of your history, your family, or why a man your age wanders the world alone. For all we know, you are a criminal. A deserter. Cale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. I am neither. I am simply a man who recognized something precious when I found it. Something worth protecting. Worth protecting? Lyra's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. My daughter is a burden I have tried to be rid of for years. She is plain. She is old. She has no value because her father's failures left this family with nothing but debt and disgrace long before she understood what any of it meant. You call her precious because you are desperate, not because she possesses any actual worth. I felt each word like a physical blow, even though I had heard variations of them my entire life. They were the foundation upon which my life had been built, a foundation of worthlessness. But then Cale did something that stole the breath from my lungs. He kept my hand firmly in his and spoke directly to my parents, his voice dropping into a register of quiet, unyielding steel. I have no family here to negotiate for me. I understand this makes our union unusual. But I am asking you now, formally. I wish for Alara to be my wife. I will provide for her. I will protect her. I will give her the respect she has always deserved. That is more than she has ever received beneath your roof. You have nothing. My mother spat, her face contorted with rage. I have enough, Cale replied, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before returning to her. And what I may lack in material possessions, I make up for in recognizing her true value, when everyone else in this village seems determined to convince her she has none. The silence that followed was so profound, so sharp, I felt it could draw blood. My father, Orin, finally spoke from the edge of the crowd, his voice rough with what might have been shame. If you take her with nothing. No dowry. No belongings except the clothes on her back. We are done with her. Done. Cale agreed without a moment of hesitation. So be it. And when you abandon her, Lyra added, her voice vicious and low, do not come crawling back here. She made her choice. She will live with the consequences. She will not need to come back, Cale said. And there was something new in his tone now, something dark and powerful that made several people in the crowd take an involuntary step backward. A primal energy seemed to crackle in the air around him. Because I do not abandon what is mine. The way he said, mine, sent a shiver through my entire body, a shiver that had nothing to do with fear. Some deep, instinctual part of me, the part that was more wolf than woman, stirred in response to that declaration. It was a feeling of recognition, of a lock finally finding its key. But I could not understand why this stranger, this wanderer, felt more like home than the house where I had been raised. Not yet. As Cale led me away from the square, away from my family and the staring eyes of Oakhaven, I dared to glance back only once. My mother stood rigid, her face a mask of fury and stunned disbelief. My father would not meet my eyes. The crowd was already beginning to disperse, the show over, their gossip already shifting, transforming from my shame to the strange, compelling authority of the man who had just claimed me. We walked in silence toward the small, isolated cottage Cale had been renting on the edge of the woods. The air was cold, but the warmth of his hand around mine was an anchor in the storm of my emotions. Are you all right? He asked softly, his voice now stripped of its commanding power, filled only with concern. I nodded, unable to find my voice. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me trembling and weak. I am sorry you had to endure that, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. I never wanted to cause you pain. You did not cause it, I whispered, my throat tight. You ended it. He stopped walking then and turned to face me. The storm in his eyes had softened into something warmer, something that made my heart ache. Alara, the life I can offer you now, it will not be easy. It will be simple, humble, but I swear to you, you will never again kneel in the dirt for anyone. Tears finally welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of shame. They were tears of a hope so fragile I was afraid to even name it. A simple life with respect is a greater treasure than a golden cage with contempt, Kale. He lifted his other hand and gently brushed a stray tear from my cheek. The touch was so tender, so reverent, it stole my breath. Then I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret your choice. In that moment, standing on that dusty path between the village that had rejected me and the uncertain future with this enigmatic man, I felt the first, faint stirrings of something new. It was the beginning of my freedom. But it was also the beginning of a mystery. Because as I looked into Kale's eyes, I knew with a certainty that chilled my soul that the man I had just married, the man who spoke with the quiet authority of a king but lived the life of a peasant, was hiding a secret. A secret so vast and so deep, it would shake the very foundations of our world. And I was now bound to him, for better or for worse, until the truth decided to reveal itself. 3 months earlier, in a world far removed from the dusty simplicity of Oakhaven, the king of Eldoria stood at the head of the obsidian council table. The throne room was a masterpiece of mountain stone, carved by ancient hands and illuminated by torches that had burned for 5 centuries. The air was thick with the scent of pine and old magic. Lysander Blackwood, at 42 years of age, carried the weight of his crown not as a privilege, but as a chain. "Your Majesty," Lord Valerius began, his voice a familiar, weary sound in the vast chamber. His grey beard trembled with a frustration he could no longer contain. "You cannot continue to delay this. The bloodline must be secured. The kingdom needs a Luna. It needs heirs. If something were to happen to you, the chaos would tear the 5 territories apart." Lysander's gaze, the color of winter frost, swept over the assembled council. They were good people, loyal to the realm, but they could not see beyond tradition. "Death comes for every king, Valerius," he interrupted, his voice a low rumble that silenced further argument before it could form. "It can wait. But the kingdom cannot." Lady Isolde interjected, her tone more diplomatic but her message just as sharp. "The lesser alphas grow restless. They see a throne without a queen, a king without a mate. They whisper that the Blackwood line has grown weak, that its power is fading. They wonder if the time has come for a new dynasty to rise." Lysander's hands tightened on the carved back of his chair. They meant well. They believed a political marriage would stabilize the realm, unite a powerful family to his own, and produce an heir to continue his legacy. What they could never understand was that his wolf, the primal part of his soul, had never stirred for any of the noble-born females they had paraded before him over the years. His instincts remained silent and cold. He would not chain himself to a stranger, would not force a bond his very nature rejected, simply to placate their fears. "I understand your concerns," Lysander said, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. "But I will not marry for politics. When the time is right, when destiny provides the one meant to stand beside me, I will know. Until then, Eldoria remains strong under my command alone." The council exchanged uneasy glances but held their tongues. They had learned long ago that once Lysander's mind was set, arguing was like trying to hold back the tide. As the meeting concluded and the councillors filed out, only one man remained. Theron, his beta and oldest friend. "You felt something," Theron said quietly once the heavy doors had closed, leaving them in the echoing silence of the throne room. "During the full moon ceremony 3 nights past. I saw it in your eyes. A flicker. A distraction." Lysander's shoulders tensed. Theron knew him too well. He moved to the great arched window that overlooked the sprawling capital city of Silverhold, nestled in the valley below the mountain palace. "I felt a pull," Lysander admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "To the north and west. Faint, like a single thread of silk stretched taut over a great distance. But it was there. A calling. A mate bond, perhaps. Or maybe just the wishful thinking of a man who has been alone for too long." He straightened, as if he could physically shake off the sensation. "It does not matter. We have more immediate concerns. The reports from the borderlands. Exactly, Theron agreed, his expression darkening. 3 villages have reported strange wolves moving through their territories without seeking permission. And now, the rumors say Alpha Magnus is allowing human hunters onto his lands. If that is true, it is a direct violation of the Great Treaty. Lysander's jaw clenched. The Treaty of 5 Territories had kept peace between the wolf packs and the human kingdoms for generations. If Magnus had broken it, the consequences would be war. If I arrive with the royal guard, Lysander said, his mind already racing ahead, Magnus will hide his treachery. He will show me only what he wants me to see. I will be fed lies served on a platter of false courtesy. He turned from the window, his decision made. I need to go alone. I need to see the truth with my own eyes, to walk among them as nobody. People talk freely around those they consider beneath them. I will learn more in a week as a common wanderer than in a month of royal inspections. Theron was quiet for a long moment, his worry a palpable force in the room. That is dangerously reckless, Lysander. Then you would make an excellent king in my place, Lysander replied, a dry, humorless smile touching his lips. But nothing will happen. I will disguise my scent, dress as a commoner, travel as a laborer seeking work. I will be a ghost. Where will you go? Theron asked, his reluctance clear. Oakhaven. It is a small, poor village on the edge of Magnus's territory. The kind of place where no one asks questions, and where a wandering pair of hands will be welcomed. Send coded messages to the safe houses along the northern routes. If there is an emergency, you know how to reach me. Theron nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable. And if you find this, pull, while you are playing the part of a common man? This thread you felt? Lysander's smile faded. The odds are insignificant, my friend. The pull could have come from anywhere. It was probably nothing. But even as he said the words, his wolf stirred restlessly within him, a low, persistent growl of disagreement. And Lysander knew, with a certainty that chilled his blood, that he was lying to himself. The transformation from king to vagrant was a humble one. He exchanged his fine silks and leathers for rough-spun wool and a worn vest. He removed the signet ring that had been in his family for generations, hiding it in a secret compartment of his travel pack. The final, most crucial part of his disguise was an iron collar, etched with ancient runes. When he fastened it around his neck, he felt a surge of magic dampen his immense alpha aura and mask his unique royal scent. To any who saw him, he would be just another lone wolf, perhaps a little larger than most, but otherwise unremarkable. A man named Kale. The journey to Oakhaven took him through landscapes he usually only saw from a distance. He saw the poverty in the outer villages, the struggle in the eyes of his people. It was a stark reminder of why he ruled, and why the treachery of an alpha like Magnus could not be allowed to stand. He arrived in Oakhaven on a cool afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky. The village was exactly as his reports had described, a cluster of weathered cottages, a dusty central square, an air of quiet desperation. He had been there less than an hour, just long enough to stable his horse and ask about work, when he saw her. She was struggling with 2 heavy wooden buckets of water, her arms trembling with the strain. She had long, chestnut brown hair tied in a simple braid, and a dress that had been mended so many times it was a tapestry of its own history. Her face was flushed with effort, but there was a determined set to her jaw that spoke of a spirit unbroken by hardship. And something inside of him, shattered. His wolf, which had been dormant and suppressed by the iron collar, surged forward with an intensity that nearly brought him to his knees. It was a primal, undeniable roar of recognition that echoed through every fiber of his being. The collar kept the outward signs hidden, but inside, every instinct he possessed was screaming, howling, demanding that he go to her, shield her, protect her. Mate. The word was not a thought, but a truth, resonating through him like a bell that had been waiting a lifetime to be struck. The faint pull he had felt during the full moon had not been his imagination. It had been this. It had been her. He watched as she set the buckets down for a moment, shaking out her arms and flexing her hands. Even from this distance, he could see the angry red marks the rope handles had left on her palms. She took a deep breath, picked the heavy buckets up again, and continued her slow, arduous walk. Lysander, Kale, followed. He caught up to her where the road turned toward a row of particularly shabby cottages. Those look heavy, he said, his voice softer than he intended. May I help? She startled, nearly dropping the buckets, and turned to face him with wide, wary eyes. Up close, she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps in her mid-20s, though a life of weariness made her seem older. Her eyes were a deep, warm brown, flecked with gold like sunlight through autumn leaves. They studied him with immediate suspicion. I do not need help, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Thank you. I am sure you are more than capable, Cale replied easily, keeping his own powerful strength carefully concealed. But being capable does not mean you must struggle alone when help is being offered. I am new here, just arrived. I thought I might do a good deed before asking around for work. She hesitated, her gaze flicking to her raw palms and then back to his face. You are looking for work? Anything honest. Farm labor, repairs. My name is Cale. She studied him for another long moment, and he could see the war between her pride and her exhaustion being fought behind her beautiful eyes. Alara, she said finally, with a note of resignation. And if you are going to be working around here, you might as well know where the Vance house is. These are headed there. She allowed him to take the buckets. He made sure to show the appropriate amount of effort, the slight strain a normal man would feel. The truth was, he could have carried 4 times the weight without breaking a sweat. They walked in silence, and Cale was acutely aware of her presence beside him. The rhythm of her breathing, the way a stray strand of hair curled against her neck, the faint, clean scent of lavender and wood smoke that clung to her clothes. His wolf was pacing inside him, a caged beast demanding he claim what was rightfully his. But Lysander had survived 42 years by being patient, by thinking 10 steps ahead. So he buried the king and embraced the role of Cale. He walked beside her, and he waited. This is it, Alara said as they approached a dilapidated cottage with a sagging roof and a garden choked with weeds. The whole structure leaned slightly, as if it were as tired as the girl standing before him. Cale set the buckets down, his eyes scanning the cottage with a practiced gaze. That roof will not last another winter, he commented. The frame beneath the thatch is likely rotted through. I know, Alara said, a world of weariness in those 2 words. I have been trying to save enough to hire someone, but... She trailed off, shaking her head. Thank you again. It was kind of you. She picked up the buckets and started toward the door, clearly ending the conversation, but Cale spoke without thinking. I could fix it, he said. The roof. If you would like. Alara turned back, confusion and suspicion warring on her face. I do not have the money to pay for repairs. I am not asking for money, Cale said, the lie coming easily, woven from a thread of tea. Ruth, I need to build a reputation if I want steady work in Oakhaven. Doing a good job where people can see it, that is worth more than coin. The truth was simpler, more primal. His wolf would not let him walk away. Alara studied him, her head tilted. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would you help me? Specifically? Because you are mine, his wolf snarled. Because I have searched for you across centuries. But Cale could not say that. So he gave her a truth that was close enough. You look like someone who has been carrying heavy things alone for far too long, he said softly, his eyes holding hers. I thought perhaps it was time someone helped. Something flickered in her eyes then. Not hope, not yet. But surprise. A stunned disbelief that anyone would notice her burden at all. Before she could respond, a harsh voice sliced through the air from inside the cottage. Alara, where have you been? That water was needed an hour ago. The light drained from Alara's face, replaced by a resigned exhaustion that was heartbreaking to witness. I have to go, she murmured, not meeting his eyes. But, thank you for the offer. She hurried inside, the door closing with a soft, final thud. Cale stood alone in the overgrown yard, listening to the raised voices from within. A woman berating, a girl apologizing, the familiar, ugly sounds of a spirit being systematically crushed. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. The iron collar felt like a prison. His wolf raged against the magical suppression, demanding he tear the door from its hinges and show them all what happened to those who dared to hurt his queen. But he could not. Not yet. So Lysander Blackwood, the Alpha King of Eldoria, turned and walked away from his destined mate. He would fix her roof. He would find reasons to be near her. And he would do it not as a king commanding loyalty, but as a man named Cale, offering the one thing she had clearly never known in her life: unconditional care. The most dangerous mission of his life had just become infinitely more complicated, and the fate of his kingdom now rested on the trust of a woman who had every reason to trust no one. The days that followed fell into a new, fragile rhythm. Each morning, as the sun began to paint the eastern sky in hues of gold and rose, Cale arrived at the Vance cottage with a satchel of borrowed tools. Alara would watch him from the window, her expression a careful mask of wariness, as if waiting for the moment his kindness would reveal its price. But he simply worked. He started on the roof, his movements efficient and sure. He stripped away the rotten thatch, his powerful shoulders making the labor look effortless. He replaced the crumbling wooden beams beneath, his hands, though calloused, moving with a surprise. Sing precision. He was not just strong, he was skilled. This was not the work of a mere drifter. Alara noted the way he assessed problems, solved them with a quiet intelligence that seemed at odds with his station. It was the first thread of the mystery that was Cale. At midday, she would bring him a cup of water. The first time, she set it on the porch step and retreated back inside without a word. The second day, she lingered for a moment, her eyes tracing the progress he had made. "The structure was worse than I thought," he commented, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. "It is a wonder it did not collapse on you last winter." "It held," Alara said softly, her arms crossed over her chest. You should not have to live in a place that just holds," he replied, his stormy eyes meeting hers. "You deserve a home that protects you." The simple statement, spoken with such conviction, left her speechless. She fled back inside, her heart pounding strangely in her chest. But gradually, day by day, her retreats grew slower. Their exchanges lengthened from single sentences to brief conversations about the weather, the best way to season the stew she was making, the book of old legends she had found tucked away in a trunk. He listened to her talk about the stories of warrior kings and wise queens with an intensity that was flattering and unnerving. He did not just hear her, he absorbed her words. He learned that she was 27, that her father's failed merchant ventures had plunged the family into a poverty from which they had never recovered, and that she had shouldered the burden of caring for her younger sisters and managing the household since she was a girl. He learned that she found solace in the quiet of the forest, that she loved the scent of rain on dry earth, and that she possessed a quiet, observant intelligence that her family had always dismissed as simplicity. And with each small revelation, Cale felt his wolf settle deeper into a state of profound, possessive certainty. This was not merely attraction or the simple recognition of a mate bond. This was the discovery of the other half of his soul, hidden in the last place anyone would ever think to look for a queen. After the roof was finished, solid and weather-tight for the first time in a decade, he found other work in the village. He helped the blacksmith repair a wagon axle, his knowledge of metal and leverage surprising the seasoned craftsman. He mended fences for elderly wolves who could no longer manage the hard labor, accepting nothing more than a warm meal as payment. Oakhaven began to accept his presence, seeing him as a harmless, useful drifter, a temporary fixture in their hardscrabble lives. And every evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line, he flew an excuse to walk past the Vance cottage. Sometimes Alara would be in the small garden, pulling weeds or harvesting the few vegetables that struggled to grow in the poor soil. They would talk then, their conversations stretching as the twilight deepened around them. Her wariness slowly, gradually, began to transform into something that looked almost like friendship. It was during one of these quiet evenings, nearly 6 weeks after his arrival, that the careful walls Cale had built around himself developed a crack. They were sitting on the rickety porch steps, watching the fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Alara had just finished telling him about a tale from her book, a legend about a star that fell from the sky and took the form of a woman. "Do you believe in that?" Cale asked, his voice unusually soft. "In magic that can transform something ordinary into something extraordinary?" Alara was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the distant trees. "I used to," she whispered, the words barely audible. "When I was a little girl, I believed that someday, someone would come and see past all of this." She gestured vaguely at the cottage, at herself. "Past the mended dresses and the empty pantry and the disappointment I seemed to carry like a shadow. I believed they would see something more." She shook her head, a sad, small smile touching her lips. But that is the thinking of children. Real life does not work that way. Cale turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. What if it does? He asked, his voice low and earnest. What if someone already sees past all of that? What if someone looks at you and sees resilience instead of failure? Strength instead of disappointment? Worth instead of a burden? Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Cale, I know I am nobody, he continued, the words tumbling out, a dangerous breach in his own defenses. I know I have nothing to offer you but these 2 hands and whatever protection a wanderer can provide. But I see you, Alara. I see who you truly are, not who they have convinced you that you are supposed to be. The air between them grew thick and charged, humming with unspoken truths and a connection that defied all logic. Alara stared at him, her hands trembling where they rested on her knees. Why? She breathed. Why would you care about someone like me? Because you are my queen. Because my soul recognized yours the moment I saw you. But he could not say that. So instead, he reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and covered her hand with his. Her skin was cool against his palm. Because caring about you is the easiest and most real thing I have done in years. They sat like that as the stars emerged one by one in the velvet sky, hands ouching, something profound and terrifying and beautiful building a bridge between them. When Alara finally stood to go inside, she paused at the door and looked back at him. The expression on her face held a fragile, burgeoning hope that outshone the moon. Good night, Cale. Good night, Alara. But they both knew, with a certainty that shook them to their core, that something had irrevocably shifted. A path had been chosen, and there was no turning back. The following week, the village gossip, which had been a low hum, swelled into a roar. Alara first heard the whispers at the village well, where 2 women fell conspicuously silent as she approached. She felt their eyes on her back like cold points as she drew her water. At the market, conversations halted when she passed, only to resume in hushed, urgent tones the moment she was out of earshot. Her younger sister, Liana, appeared at the cottage 2 days later, her pretty face a mixture of false concern and barely concealed glee. Mother has heard the rumors, Liana announced without preamble, flouncing into the main room without an invitation. About you and the laborer. People are talking, Alara. They say you are spending inappropriate amounts of time with a man who has no name and no prospects. It looks desperate. The word, chosen with cruel precision, landed exactly as intended. He has been kind to me, Alara said, her voice low but steady. She would not let them poison this. I will not apologize for that. Kind? Liana's laugh was a sharp, mocking sound. Men are not kind without expecting something in return. And when you are 27 and unmarried, everyone assumes they know what that something is. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a malicious whisper. They are laughing at you, sister. They are saying you are so pathetic, you would cling to the first man who paid you any attention, even if he is nothing but a stray dog. After Liana left, the silence in the cottage was heavy and suffocating. The old, familiar weight of judgment pressed down on her, threatening to crush the fragile hope that had begun to bloom. But for the first time, it met resistance. A new, defiant strength had taken root inside her, fed by weeks of quiet conversations and a hand held in the twilight. She would not let them take this from her. Cale heard about Lyra's reaction from the blacksmith's wife, who took a certain grim pleasure in delivering the news. He found Alara that evening in the garden, yanking weeds from the soil with a ferocity that spoke of pent-up emotion. She did not look up as he approached, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, the telltale redness around her eyes. Your mother spoke to you, he said quietly, crouching beside her. My mother has many opinions, Alara replied, her voice tight, most of them about my many failings. Cale watched her work for a moment, the dirt staining her hands, the determined set of her jaw. I can stay away, he offered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. If that would make your life easier. I never wanted to be the source of more pain for you. Her hands stilled. She looked at him, and there was a fire in her eyes he had never seen before. Do you want to stay away? No, he admitted, the truth stark and unadorned. But what I want is not what matters here. Your well-being is all that matters. Why? Her voice rose, laced with a frustration that had been building for a lifetime. Why is everyone else's opinion more important than what I feel? Than what you feel? The question hung between them, charged and dangerous. Kale could feel his wolf straining against the iron collar, the magic that suppressed his aura feeling thinner than ever. The urge to claim her, to mark her as his before the entire world, was a physical ache. Instead, he reached out and covered her dirt-stained hand with his once more. It is not more important, he said firmly. Not to me. But you need to understand what you are choosing. If I stay, if we continue, the gossip will worsen. Your family's disapproval will harden into something uglier. The village will judge you more harshly than they already do. I can bear their contempt, but I cannot bear the thought of you suffering for my presence. Alara looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him, her gaze clear and unwavering. What if I told you that their judgment is a gentle breeze compared to the cold isolation I felt before you came? What if I said I would rather face their cruelty with you beside me than face their pity alone? Kale's chest tightened, a wave of emotion so powerful it threatened to undo him. This woman, who had been told she was weak her entire life, was the bravest person he had ever known. Then I would say you have a courage that this village does not deserve, he whispered. She offered him a small, fragile smile. It is not courage. It is just, I am finally tired of being afraid. They stayed there as night fell, two souls choosing each other against the tide of an unforgiving world. And as Kale looked at Alara, at the strength and vulnerability in her eyes, he knew with an absolute, unshakable certainty that whatever consequences awaited, whatever price he would have to pay for his deception, he would never regret this moment. The foundation of their trust had been laid, not on the lies of a king, but on the genuine care of a man named Kale. And for now, that had to be enough. The confrontation in the village square was a storm Alara had spent her entire life waiting for, yet when it finally broke, she found herself standing firm in the eye of the hurricane. It was Kale's hand in hers, his voice telling her she knelt for no one, that anchored her. As he faced her mother's venom with a calm, unyielding authority, she felt the ground solidify beneath her feet. When he formally asked for her hand, offering respect and protection as his only currency, the last of her doubts crumbled to dust. Her father's declaration that she would be cast out with nothing felt less like a sentence and more like a liberation. Done. They were done with her. The words were a key turning in a lock, setting her free from a cage she had never realized she was in. The handfasting was arranged for 3 nights hence, under the full moon. There would be no feast, no celebration, no family to witness it. Yet, to Alara, it felt more sacred than any grand ceremony in the village square could ever be. Kale led her to the small, isolated cottage he rented on the forest's edge. It was simple, just one room with a hearth, a table, and a bed, but it was clean and solid, and the roof did not leak. It was a sanctuary. This is your home now, he said, his voice gentle as he opened the door for her. Our home. The word, our, sent a shiver of wonder through her. She stepped inside, her eyes taking in the humble space. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the rough-hewn wooden walls. It was more peace than she had known in a lifetime. It is perfect, she whispered, and she meant it. The days leading to the ceremony passed in a blur of quiet preparation. Kale brought home a length of fine, silver-blue silk from a traveling merchant. For you, he said, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. For the ceremony. Alara's breath caught. She had never owned anything so beautiful. She spent the next 2 days sewing, her fingers flying as she fashioned a simple but elegant gown. It was a labor of love, each stitch a silent promise. On the evening of the handfasting, she dressed alone in the cottage. The silk felt like cool water against her skin, and when she looked at her reflection in the small, polished metal mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back was not the downtrodden daughter of the Vance house. Her eyes held a new light, her posture a new strength. Kale was waiting for her at the edge of the whispering pines, in a small clearing bathed in the brilliant light of the full moon. He had also changed, wearing a clean, dark tunic that made his stormy eyes seem even deeper. He looked at her as she approached, and the raw awe in his expression made her heart soar. You are? He seemed to struggle for words, his gaze drinking her in. You are a vision, Alara. He held out his hand, and in his palm lay a length of braided cord, woven from silver thread and strands of his own dark hair. For the binding, he explained softly. They stood facing each other under the vast, star-dusted sky, the moon their only witness. There was no elder, no crowd, only the ancient, silent forest and the truth that hummed between them. Cale took her hands, his touch firm and warm. His voice was low and solemn as he began to speak the old words, the words of the ancient vow. I, Cale, take you, Alara, to be my wife, my partner, my heart. I vow to honor you, to protect you, to stand beside you in sunlight and shadow. I give you my loyalty, my strength, and my faith. This I swear under the eye of the moon, before the witness of the stars. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, of a happiness so profound it had to overflow. She squeezed his hands, her voice clear and steady as she repeated the vow. I, Alara, take you, Cale, to be my husband, my partner, my heart. I vow to honor you, to stand beside you in sunlight and shadow. I give you my loyalty, my trust, and my faith. This I swear under the eye of the moon, before the witness of the stars. As the last word left her lips, Cale took the braided cord and gently wrapped it around their joined hands, binding them together. The silver threads seemed to catch the moonlight, shimmering with an otherworldly glow. By this cord, we are bound, he murmured, his eyes locked with hers. Our lives, our paths, our souls, intertwined from this night until my last breath. He did not kiss her. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture of profound intimacy and respect that sent a different, deeper warmth cascading through her. They stood like that for a long moment, bound by the cord and by a promise that felt older than time itself. My wife, he whispered, the words a reverent prayer. My husband, she breathed in return. It was done. She was his, and he was hers. Life as a married woman was a revelation. The constant criticism was replaced by quiet companionship. The fear of failure was supplanted by the freedom to simply be. Cale was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He rose early to chop wood, ensuring the fire was always lit before she woke. He taught her how to track game in the forest, his patience endless. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and he would listen as she read from her book of legends, his gaze thoughtful. But the mystery of him only deepened. One evening, she found him studying a map he had unrolled on the table. It was beautifully detailed, showing territories far beyond Oakhaven, with markings she did not understand. He looked up, startled, and quickly rolled it away. Old travels, he said dismissively, but the swiftness of his action felt like a door being closed in her face. Another tea. Ime, a traveling merchant, came to their door, a large man with a gruff demeanor. When he saw Cale, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and he gave a slight, almost unconscious nod of deference before launching into his sales pitch. Cale had responded with a cool, distant politeness that was so unlike his usual self it left Alara unsettled. She began to notice the small things. The way he carried himself, with a natural, unthinking authority. The depth of his knowledge about things a simple laborer should not know, politics, history, the complex laws of distant pacts. The way he could move through the forest with a silence that was almost supernatural. She loved him. The realization settled in her heart with the same certainty as the moon rising in the night sky. She loved his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way he made her feel valued. But she was living with a stranger, a man whose past was a locked box, and whose eyes sometimes held the shadows of a burden she could not comprehend. One night, nearly 2 months into their marriage, she awoke to find his side of the bed empty. A sliver of cold fear pierced her heart. Had he left? Had it all been a lie? She crept out of bed and found him standing outside, his back to her, staring up at the moon. His shoulders were tense, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked like a man wrestling with a demon. Cale, she whispered from the doorway. He started, turning quickly. In the moonlight, his face was etched with an anguish so deep it stole her breath. Alara, I am sorry, I did not mean to wake you. What is wrong? She asked, stepping out into the cool night air to stand beside him. You can tell me. He was silent for a long time, his gaze returning to the moon. I made a promise to you, he said finally, his voice rough. A vow under the moon. And I have not been entirely honest with you. Alara's heart plummeted. This was it, the moment the dream ended. What do you mean? He turned to her, his stormy eyes full of a torment that shook her to her core. There are things about me, about my past, things I have hidden. Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of losing you, he confessed, the words ripped from him. What we have built here, it is the only real thing in my life. If I tell you the truth, I fear it will shatter. I fear you will look at me and see only the lies. Alara reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. The braided cord from their handfasting was tucked away in a small wooden box, but she felt its presence as if it were still binding them. You told me once that you saw who I truly am, she said softly. Let me do the same for you. Whatever it is, this is our home. We can face it together. He looked down at their joined hands, a muscle ticking in his jaw. The internal war was visible on his face. She could see the desperate need to unburden himself warring with his fear. Soon, he promised hoarsely, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. I will tell you everything soon. I need to settle one more thing. I need to know you are safe. Safe from what? She pressed, a new fear coiling in her stomach. But he just shook his head, his expression closing off. Trust me, Alara, please, just a little while longer. He led her back inside, his arm a solid, protective weight around her shoulders. But as she lay beside him, listening to his breathing even out into sleep, Alara stared into the darkness. The foundation of their life together, so carefully built, now had a crack running through its center. The man she loved was keeping a secret that haunted him, a secret that he believed could destroy them. And the terrifying truth was, she had no idea if their love was strong enough to survive it. The moon's vow had bound them, but now it was being tested by the shadows of a truth she could not yet see. The secret became a third presence in their small cottage, a silent specter that sat at their table and lingered in the spaces between their words. Kale's promise of soon hung in the air, unfulfilled, and with each passing day, Alara felt the distance between them grow, not from a lack of love, but from the weight of the unspoken. He began to leave for days at a time, offering vague explanations about checking trap lines or seeking work in the next valley. Each departure was a fresh wound, each return a bittersweet relief. He would come back weary, his eyes shadowed with a fatigue that was more than physical, his scent carrying the faint, foreign tang of distant places and strange wolves. During one of these absences, a fierce storm lashed at Oakhaven. Wind howled like a tormented spirit around the cottage, and rain fell in relentless, blinding sheets. Alara, alone, huddled by the fire, the memory of Kale's torment the night under the moon haunting her. What was he doing out in this? What was so important that it pulled him away from the safety of their home, into such danger? The storm passed, leaving a world washed clean and sparkling under a bruised sky. Kale returned the next evening, his clothes mud-spattered, a fresh, barely healed scratch running along his jawline. He claimed a falling branch had caught him in the forest, but the cut was too clean, too straight. It looked like the mark of a blade. Fear, cold and sharp, crystallized in Alara's heart. This was no longer just about a hidden past. This was about a present danger. That night, as he slept the deep, exhausted sleep of the gravely weary, he made a decision. The need to know, to understand the shadows that clung to her husband, outweighed her fear of what she might find. Her eyes fell on his travel pack, tucked away in the corner. It was the only part of his life he kept firmly closed to her. With trembling hands, she crept toward it. The leather was worn but of fine quality, far better than anything a simple laborer should own. Her fingers fumbled with the buckle, the sound deafening in the silent room. She glanced at Kale, but he did not stir. Inside, nestled atop a spare tunic, was a small, locked wooden box. It was intricately carved with wolves and stars, the work of a master craftsman. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the source of the mystery. She picked it up, its weight feeling significant in her palms. There was no key. Frustration and desperation warred within her. She ran her fingers over the carvings, tracing the path of a howling wolf. As she pressed down on the wolf's eye, a hidden catch gave way with a soft click. The lid sprang open. She nearly dropped the box. Nestled inside on a bed of dark velvet was a heavy signet ring. It was made of a strange, dark silver, and its face was carved with the imposing figure of a majestic wolf, its head thrown back in a silent howl, a single, sharp-pointed star above it. It was a symbol of immense authority, of royalty. She had seen sketches of such seals in her book of legends. This was the crest of a ruling house. An alpha king. The world tilted around her. Her breath caught in her throat, too sharp, too painful. This was no mere noble's son in hiding. This was impossible. Her gaze fell on a folded piece of parchment tucked beside the ring. With numb fingers, she unfolded it. It was a map, more detailed than the one she had glimpsed before. It showed the 5 territories of Eldoria, and moving across the northern border of their own territory, were small, carefully inked markers. Next to them, in a bold, familiar handwriting, were notes. Hunter encampment confirmed. Silver-tipped arrows in quantity. Rogue wolves, not lone, organized. Coordinating with humans. Alpha Magnus's involvement certain. Meeting point, Blackwater Falls. Goal, destabilize the northern territories. Target, the crown. The words blurred before her eyes. The crown. It felt as though a block of ice had formed in her stomach. The conspiracy, the danger, it was all real. And her husband, her simple, gentle Cale, was at the very center of it. He wasn't just investigating it. The notes were written from the perspective of someone whose rightful place was being threatened. The crown. She stumbled back from the pack, the ring clutched in her cold hand, the map fluttering to the floor. The pieces crashed together in her mind with the force of a thunderclap. The authority in his voice. The deference others showed him. The knowledge, the bearing, the constant, heavy weight of responsibility in his eyes. Cale was not a wanderer. He was not a laborer. He was Lysander Blackwood, the Alpha King. The cottage walls seemed to close in on her. The humble, peaceful life she had built was a beautiful, intricate lie. She had fallen in love with a phantom. She had bound her life to a stranger, a king who had been playing a part in her simple, pathetic little world. A low groan came from the bed. Cale, Lysander, stirred, his senses likely picking up on her spike of terror and anguish. His eyes fluttered open, and they immediately found her standing in the middle of the room, the royal signet ring gleaming in her trembling hand. The sleep vanished from his face, replaced by a stark, horrified realization. He sat up slowly, the blankets pooling around his waist. The silence between them was heavier than any stone, filled with the shattered remains of their trust. Alara, he began, his voice hoarse with sleep and dread. Is it true? She whispered, the sound ragged, tearing from a throat tight with unshed tears. She held up the ring. It felt like a brand. Is this who you are? He closed his eyes for a brief moment, a pained expression crossing his features. When he opened them, the last vestiges of Cale, the laborer, were gone. In his place was the king of Eldoria, his gaze filled with a grim, resigned honesty. Yes, he said, the single word final and devastating. The confirmation was a physical blow. She staggered, bracing herself against the table. All of it? She pressed, her voice breaking. The map? The conspiracy? The crown? Yes. He swung his legs out of bed, but he did not approach her, giving her space, as if she were a frightened animal. My name is Lysander Blackwood. I am the Alpha King. I came to Oakhaven in disguise to uncover the truth about the traitors and the hunters. The man you know as Cale, he was a role I played. A role, she repeated, the words tasting like ash. Every tender moment, every whispered confidence, every shared laugh, were they all just part of the performance? Was any of it real? Or was I just convenient? A cover for your mission? No. The word was ripped from him, fierce and immediate. He took a step forward, his hands clenching at his sides. Alara, look at me. What I feel for you has nothing to do with my crown or my mission. It is the most real thing I have ever known. I married you because my soul recognized yours. I kept my identity secret because I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would never have seen me. You would have only seen the king. So you lied, she shot back, anger now rising to mix with the hurt, a hot, cleansing fire. You built our life on a foundation of lies. You let me believe I was marrying a man I could stand beside as an equal, when all along, you were a king who could command armies. I wanted you to choose me, he implored, his voice raw with emotion. Not my title, not my power, not my kingdom. Just me, the man who fixed your roof and carried your water. The man who loves you. The declaration hung in the air between them, a truth that was now tangled in a web of deception. Alara stared at him, at this stranger who was her husband, this king who had shared her bed. The love in his eyes was real, she could feel it, a desperate, genuine force that warred with the betrayal crushing her heart. You should have told me, she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving only a hollow, aching pain. After the handfasting, you should have trusted me with the truth. I know, he admitted, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I am a coward, Alara. I was a king who was terrified of losing the one thing that made him feel like a man. I am so sorry. He stood before her, not as a mighty monarch, but as a man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. The secret was out, its shadow now a chasm between them. The simple cottage no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a gilded cage. She was the wife of a king, a fact that should have been a fantasy, but felt like a sentence. And as she looked at Lysander, at the love and regret in his eyes, she did not know if the woman she had become, Alara, who kneeled for no one, was strong enough to bridge the gap his deception had created. The storm outside had passed, but a far more dangerous one had just begun within their own walls. The silence in the cottage was a living entity, thick and suffocating. Alara stood frozen, the cold weight of the signet ring in her palm feeling like it was burning her skin. Lysander, no, Kale, she could not yet think of him as Lysander, remained by the bed, his posture one of defeat, his eyes pleading. Say something, he whispered, the words cracking in the stillness. What would you have me say, Your Majesty? The title was a weapon, sharp and cold. She saw him flinch as if struck. Should I curtsy? Should I kneel? The rules of etiquette for addressing a king were never part of my education. Alara, please, he begged, taking a tentative step forward. Do not. I am still the man who married you under the moon. I am still Kale. Kale does not exist. The cry was torn from her, raw and painful. He was a story you told, a character you played. You lied to me about your name, your past, your very being. How can I believe anything you say? How can I believe that what we had was real? It was real, he insisted, his own voice rising with desperate passion. Every moment of it, the love I feel for you is the truest part of me. It is the one thing that has never been a performance. I hid my title, yes. I hid my mission, but I could not hide my heart, and my heart is yours. He moved closer, slowly, as one would approach a skittish deer. When I saw you that first day, struggling with those buckets, something in me broke open. My wolf recognized you instantly. You were my fated mate, Alara. Destiny itself bound us together. The collar I wear, he gestured to the iron band at his neck, it suppresses my alpha aura, my true scent. It kept you from feeling the bond as I did. But the bond was always there. It is there now. Can you not feel it? She stared at him, her mind reeling. Fated mate. The words were from the oldest legends, tales of bonds woven by the moon goddess herself, unbreakable and eternal. It was a concept so vast, so profound, it dwarfed even the revelation of his kingship. Her anger faltered, replaced by a dizzying confusion. Was the strange, magnetic pull she had always felt towards him, the sense of home and rightness, not just love, but magic? Was her soul truly tied to his? I don't know what I feel, she confessed, her voice trembling. I feel betrayed. I feel foolish. I feel like the entire world has been pulled out from under my feet. I know, he said, his voice softening. And I will spend the rest of my life earning back your trust. But you must understand the danger. The conspiracy I uncovered is real. Alpha Magnus is working with human hunters to destabilize my kingdom. He knows I was here, investigating. The attack on the village, it was not random. They came because they thought I was vulnerable here, that they could strike at the king while he was isolated. He gestured to the map on the floor. I have the proof I need. I have names, locations. But my presence here now puts everyone in Oakhaven, in greater danger. I must return to Silverhold. I must mobilize my armies and confront Magnus before his plans come to fruition. Return? The word was a cold shock. You are leaving? I must, he said, his expression pained but resolute. I have a duty to my people, to the entire kingdom. I can no longer hide here while a traitor prepares for war. And what of your duty to me? The question was barely a whisper. Your wife? He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to cradle her face, his touch both familiar and terrifyingly new. You are coming with me. The world seemed to tilt again. To Silverhold? To the palace? Kale? Lysander, I cannot. I am a village girl. I have mended clothes and scrubbed floors. I do not know how to be a queen. You already are a queen, he said, his thumb stroking her cheek. You have a queen's strength, a queen's compassion, a queen's heart. The court? He politics? The crown? He glanced at the ring in her hand. Those are just trappings. They are not what makes a ruler. You have ruled over your own life with more grace and courage than most of my nobles have shown in governing their lands. You will learn the rest. And I will be with you, every step of the way. He took the ring from her numb fingers and slipped it back into the box, closing the lid on the physical symbol of his deception. But the choice is yours. She looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw the king in the set of his shoulders, in the authority that now radiated from him, no longer fully contained by the iron collar. But she also saw Kale in the stormy eyes that held so much love for her, in the mouth that had whispered promises in the dark. They were not 2 different men, but one complicated, flawed, and powerful whole. A man who had lied to her, but a man who loved her. A king with a kingdom to save, but a husband who was begging his wife to stand beside him. The bond he spoke of, she could feel it now, a faint, silver thread in her soul, tugging her towards him. It was real. It was as real as her hurt and her fear. You should have trusted me, she repeated, but the anger was gone, leaving only a deep, weary sorrow. I know, he acknowledged, his own regret a tangible force. It is the greatest mistake of my life. And I will spend every day proving myself worthy of your forgiveness. He was giving her a choice. She could stay in Oakhaven, in the safety of the life they had built on lies. Or she could step into the terrifying, unknown world of a queen, beside a man who was both a stranger and her destiny. She thought of her mother's scorn, the village's pity. She thought of the quiet strength she had found within herself. She thought of the handfasting cord, woven with his hair, a promise that felt more binding than any crown. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her decision solidifying in her heart. She would not run from this. She would not let fear dictate her path ever again. Then we go to Silverhold, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. We face your council and your court. We face this traitor, Magnus. But we face it together. No more secrets, Lysander. From this moment forward, we face everything together. The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if she were the most precious thing in his world. And in that moment, with her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the heart of both the king and the man she loved, Alara knew her life would never be the same. The weight of a crown was descending upon her, but she would not let it break her. She would learn to bear it. For him, foe, are them, for the destiny that had chosen her, a simple village girl, to become the Luna Queen of Eldoria. The journey was just beginning. The journey began at first light. The humble cottage, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage they were leaving behind. Alara packed a single small bag, her movements mechanical. The beautiful silk gown from her handfasting was folded with care, a tangible memory of a truth that had existed within the lie. Lysander, the name was still foreign and heavy on her tongue, moved with a new purpose, the weight of kingship settling back onto his shoulders like a familiar cloak. They were not alone. As they stepped outside, 3 riders emerged from the tree line, their horses powerful and sleek, their postures rigid with discipline. They wore dark leather armor, and on their chests, the same wolf and star crest from the signet ring was embroidered in silver thread. The Royal Guard. The lead rider, a man with a stern face and eyes that missed nothing, dismounted and dropped to one knee. Your Majesty, he said, his voice deep and respectful. Captain Redan, at your command. Beta Theron sent us ahead to secure your passage. The main contingent awaits us a day's ride from here. Lysander gave a curt nod. Rise, Captain. This is Alara. He did not need to say more. The captain's sharp eyes flicked to her, and he bowed his head deeply. "My queen," he said, and the title sent a jolt through her system. This was real. It was happening. They were provided with horses from the guard's spare mounts. Alara had only ever ridden the old, placid plow horse from her father's farm. This creature was a different beast entirely, sleek, powerful, and quivering with energy. As Lysander helped her into the saddle, his hands firm on her waist, she felt a surge of vertigo. "Just follow my lead," he murmured, his voice for her alone. "She will sense your nerves. Breathe deeply. You are in control." His words were a lifeline. She focused on the feeling of the leather reins in her hands, the solid warmth of the horse beneath her. She was Alara Vance, who had faced her mother's wrath and a village's scorn. She could learn to ride a horse. They set off at a steady pace, leaving Oakhaven behind without a backward glance. The familiar, dusty path gave way to roads she had never traveled. The landscape began to change, the struggling fields of the borderlands transforming into rolling hills dotted with prosperous farms. People stopped their work to watch the small, grim procession pass. They saw the royal guards, they saw the powerful stranger who rode at the center, and they saw the woman with him, her back straight, her face a mask of calm she did not feel. At night, they stayed in the royal waystations Lysander had mentioned. They were small, fortified buildings, always stocked with supplies and manned by quiet, loyal wolves who greeted their king with a reverence that was both awe-inspiring and isolating. Alara was given a separate room from Lysander, a formality that felt like another wall between them. The silence that had plagued them in the cottage now stretched across the cold stone corridors. On the second evening, as they ate a simple meal in the waystation's main hall, Captain Redan approached their table. "Your Majesty, we've received a hawk from Beta Theron," he reported, handing Lysander a small scroll. "The court is restless. News of your return, and of the Queen, has spread. There are many questions." Lysander's jaw tightened as he read the message. "Let them question," he said, his voice cold. "They will have their answers soon enough." "What kind of questions?" Alara asked, her voice small in the large room. Lysander looked up, his expression softening when he saw the anxiety in her eyes. "They will question your lineage. Your training. They will see your humble origins not as a strength, but as a weakness. They will try to test you, to find cracks in your resolve." Fear, cold and slick, coiled in her stomach. "And what will you do?" "I will stand beside you," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But you must face them, Alara. You must show them the strength I see in you. The moment you show fear, they will descend like vultures." That night, sleep was impossible. The weight of the future pressed down on her, a physical force. She slipped out of her room and found a small balcony overlooking a moonlit valley. The air was clean and cold, filled with the scent of pine. She heard a soft footstep behind her. "Could you not sleep?" Lysander asked, coming to stand beside her. "How can I?" she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I am walking into a den of wolves, and I do not know the rules of their pack." "You know the most important rule," he said quietly. "The rule of strength. Not brute force, but strength of character. You have more of it than any noble-born female in that palace." "You have to stop saying that," she said, a note of desperation in her voice. "You see me through the eyes of a man who loves me. They will not. They will see a peasant who somehow ensnared their king." He turned to face her, his expression fierce in the moonlight. "Then you will make them see what I see. You will be calm when they expect you to be overwhelmed. You will be intelligent when they expect you to be simple. You will be kind when they expect you to be cruel. You will show them that a queen is not born in a palace, but forged in fire. And you will do it not by being like them, but by being unapologetically yourself." His faith in her was a shield, but it felt so fragile. "And if I fail?" "Then we fail together," he said simply. "But you will not fail. The same spirit that defied your mother in the village square is the spirit that will win over my court. You just have to trust it." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch a familiar comfort in the terrifying unknown. "I am asking you to do the impossible. I know that, but I would not ask it if I did not believe, with every fiber of my being, that you are capable of it." He left her then, standing alone in the moonlight. His words echoed in her mind. Forged in fire. Her entire life had been a trial by fire. The scorn of her family, the judgment of her village, the betrayal of the man she loved, each had been a flame licking at her, and she had not broken. She had emerged stronger. She looked out at the vast, sleeping land, the kingdom that was now her responsibility. A strange sense of calm began to settle over her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now joined by a spark of defiant determination. They would see a village girl. They would expect her to be weak, to be cowed. They would wait for her to stumble. But Alara was done stumbling. She was done kneeling. She was the fated mate of the Alpha King. She was the Luna Queen of Eldoria. And tomorrow, she would walk into his palace and show them all exactly what that meant. The Palace of Silverhold did not simply appear on the horizon. It emerged from the very bones of the mountain, a breathtaking, terrifying symphony of stone and power. Towers pierced the low-hanging clouds, their peaks gleaming as if carved from moonlight itself. Waterfalls cascaded down colossal cliffs, their thunder a constant, distant roar. As they passed through the immense, silver-inlaid gates, Alara felt a tremor run through her horse, or perhaps it was her own soul shaking. The courtyard within was a vast expanse of polished stone, and it was filled with people. Hundreds of them, arranged in perfect, silent rows. Servants in crisp livery, guards in gleaming armor, nobles in silks and furs. Every eye was fixed on them. The air was thick with unspoken judgment and a curiosity so sharp she could almost taste it. Lysander dismounted with a fluid, powerful grace that was all king. He did not look at the crowd, his presence alone commanded their silence. He turned and reached up, his hands closing around her waist to lift her down from the saddle. It was a public gesture of support, a declaration. She placed her hands on his shoulders, her legs feeling like water, and let him guide her to the ground. He did not release her hand. Instead, he turned to face the assembled court, his voice rolling out across the courtyard with an authority that needed no volume to be absolute. "People of Eldoria," he announced. His words echoing off the ancient stones. "I present to you Alara, my true mate, your Luna Queen." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces, daring anyone to challenge him. "She comes to us from the world beyond these walls, from a life of hardship and resilience. This does not make her weak. It makes her wise. It makes her strong. It makes her uniquely qualified to understand the struggles of every wolf in this kingdom, from the highest noble to the most humble farmer. You will serve her as you serve me. With absolute loyalty, with unwavering respect, and with the dedication this kingdom deserves." As one, the entire assembly dropped to one knee. The synchronized rustle of cloth and clink of armor was a single, overwhelming sound. "Your Majesty," their voices rose in unison, a wave of fealty that crashed over her. "Welcome home. Welcome home." The words should have been a comfort. Instead, they felt like the closing of a cage door. The next hours were a blur. She was led away by a flock of quiet, efficient women, her new ladies-in-waiting, through corridors that seemed to stretch for miles. Tapestries depicting battles and coronations lined the walls, their threads telling stories of a history she was now a part of, but would never truly share. They brought her to the royal chambers. It was not a room, it was a suite of rooms. A sitting area with furniture so delicate she was afraid to sit, a bedroom with a bed that could comfortably sleep 10, and a balcony that overlooked the entire capital city sprawling in the valley below. The view was magnificent, and it made her feel utterly insignificant. "This will be your solar, your Majesty," said the head lady-in-waiting, an older woman named Anya with a kind but unreadable face. "His Majesty's chambers are through that connecting door. The royal tailor will be here shortly to begin your new wardrobe." Before Alara could process any of it, the tailor arrived with an army of assistants. They measured her with impersonal efficiency, their fingers cold, their comments about her unusual proportions, spoken just loudly enough for her to hear. Bolts of silk, velvet, and brocade were unfurled before her, fabrics so fine they felt like air. They were all in deep, royal colors, sapphire, emerald, crimson. There was no silver blue, the color of her handfasting, the color of her old life. She was a doll being dressed for a part she had never auditioned for. The first council meeting was called for that very evening. "I am sorry," Lysander said, finding her in her chambers, now wearing a gown of deep blue that was too tight in the bodice and too long in the sleeve. There is no time to let you settle. The situation with Magnus requires immediate action, and the council must see you. They must understand. Understand what? Alara asked, her voice hollow. That their king married a peasant? That their king found a queen worth more than any political alliance, he corrected, his eyes earnest. He took her hands. Remember what I told you. Be calm. Be intelligent. Be yourself. The council chamber was everything the cottage was not. Long, dark, and dominated by a massive table carved from a single piece of obsidian. 12 pairs of eyes followed her as she entered on Lysander's arm. They were the most powerful wolves in the kingdom, and their gazes were like physical weights, assessing, dissecting, finding her wanting. Lysander seated her in a high-backed chair beside his own at the head of the table. The silence was profound. It was broken by an elderly lord with a beard like a cloud of frost. Lord Valerius, Your Majesty, he began, his tone dripping with condescending politeness. While we rejoice that you have finally taken a mate, we must express our profound concern. A queen with no noble blood, no understanding of court protocol, no training in statecraft, the risks are considerable. The only risk I see, Lysander's voice was like ice, is a council that values pedigree over character. But Your Majesty, a sharp-faced woman, Lady Isolde, interjected. Character does not draft trade agreements. Character does not negotiate with rival alphas. Perhaps the Queen would benefit from a period of intensive education before she is exposed to the complexities of governance. Alara felt the words like slaps. They were talking about her as if she were not there, a child to be managed and hidden away. She saw Lysander's knuckles whiten on the arm of his chair, but before he could speak, she found her voice. Lord Valerius, Lady Isolde. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension. Every head swiveled to look at her. She kept her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, though they wanted to tremble. You are correct, she said, meeting each of their gazes in turn. I do not have noble blood. I have never drafted a trade agreement. She paused, letting the admission hang in the air. But I know what it is to go hungry in a hard winter. I know the sound a roof makes when it is about to collapse from neglect. I know the value of a single coin earned from a day's hard labor, and the despair when it is not enough. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving theirs. You speak of governing a kingdom. A kingdom is not this table. It is not these stone walls. A kingdom is its people. And if you do not understand their struggles, their fears, their hopes, then all the trade agreements in the world are just words on parchment that will never truly protect them. She took a slow breath, feeling Lysander's supportive presence beside her like a.r. "Och, I am not here to pretend I know what you know. I am here to learn from you. But I am also here to ensure that the voices of those who have never been allowed in this room are finally heard. If that is not a perspective this council values, then perhaps you are right. Perhaps I do not belong here." The silence that followed was stunned. Lord Valerius's mouth was slightly agape. Lady Isolde studied her with a new, calculating intensity. At the far end of the table, Beta Theron, whom she had only just met, gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Lord Valerius cleared his throat. Well, he said, the condescension gone, replaced by a grudging respect. It seems there may be more to consider than we initially thought. The meeting continued, the discussion shifting to border defenses and military deployments. Alara did not speak again, but she listened, absorbing everything. The gilded cage still surrounded her, its bars made of silk and obsidian and judgment. But as she sat there, the peasant queen in a room full of wolves, she realized something. She had not broken. She had not crumbled. She had faced her first test, and she had held her ground. The cage was still there, but for the first time, she felt the stirrings of the strength that might one day allow her to bend its bars. The journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The days that followed were a relentless lesson in a language Alara did not speak. It was the language of subtle glances in the grand hall, of hidden meanings in polite conversation, of fans fluttered in specific patterns to convey secret messages. Her ladies-in-waiting, led by the ever-composed Anya, tried to drill the basics of court etiquette into her, how to walk, how to sit, which fork to use for which course of the 12-course dinners that left her both hungry and overwhelmed. The nobles watched her, always watching. She felt their eyes on her back during the interminable state dinners, heard their muffled laughter when she used the wrong utensil. They were wolves circling, waiting for the newcomer to show weakness. Lady Briar was quite amused by your attempt to eat the consommé with a dessert spoon last evening, Liana, her sister who had arrived at the palace just days before, announced with a smug smile. She had swiftly allied herself with the court's young, fashionable set. She said it was charmingly rustic. Alara said nothing, merely continued to practice the script Anya had given her for the upcoming petition hearings. Her sister's presence was a fresh wound, a constant reminder of the life she had left behind, now twisted into a new form of torment. It is not just about spoons, Liana, Alara said, her voice calm despite the heat in her cheeks. It is about listening to the people who will come before us today. Liana waved a dismissive hand. Oh, the commoners. They will say whatever they think you want to hear. It is a waste of time. Later, in the great hall, Alara sat on a smaller, slightly less imposing throne beside Lysander's. The room was filled with courtiers, their chatter a buzzing hive of noise. The petitioners were brought in one by one. A farmer whose well had been poisoned by runoff from a nearby mine owned by a noble. A widow whose son had been conscripted into a local alpha's guard and had not been heard from in months. A village elder from a border territory, pleading for aid after rogue wolves had stolen their winter stores. Lord Valerius and the council had standard responses. Investigations would be launched. Inquiries would be made. The proper channels would be followed. The answers were polite, procedural, and utterly devoid of urgency. Alara watched the hope die in the petitioner's eyes, replaced by a weary resignation she knew all too well. Then, an elderly woman was helped forward. Her name was Hilda, from a small pack in the northern foothills. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Your Majesties, she began, her knuckles white as she gripped her walking stick. The floods last spring, they destroyed our mill. It is the heart of our village. We have no way to grind our grain. We have rebuilt our homes, but without the mill, we cannot rebuild our lives. We have petitioned our local alpha, but he says the royal tax takes priority over our repairs. Lord Valerius leaned forward. The process for disaster relief is clearly outlined. You must submit the forms in triplicate to the regional steward, who will then, how long? Alara's voice, clear and quiet, cut through his explanation. The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Lord Valerius looked startled. Your Majesty? How long will that process take? Alara asked, her gaze fixed on Hilda, not the Lord. With expedited handling, perhaps 3 months, Valerius said stiffly. Hilda's shoulders slumped. The first snows will have come by then. We will have already lost the harvest. Alara turned to Lysander. We have engineers here at the palace, do we not? For maintaining the aqueducts and the royal mills. We do, Lysander confirmed, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were intent on her. And we have a royal treasury? Of course. Alara looked back at Hilda, then at the council. Then we will send 2 engineers and a contingent of royal builders to Hilda's village tomorrow. We will provide the funds and materials to rebuild their mill. Not in 3 months. Now. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the court. Lord Valerius's face flushed. Your Majesty, that is highly irregular. It bypasses the entire system of regional governance. It sets a dangerous precedent. What precedent does it set? Alara asked, her voice gaining strength. That the crown cares if its people starve? That we will not let them freeze while paperwork travels between desks? She stood, her simple action commanding the room. This is not a matter of protocol. It is a matter of survival. The system has failed them. So we will not use the system. We will help them directly. She looked down at Hilda, whose wrinkled face was now streaked with tears of disbelief. Will that help your people, Hilda? Your Majesty, the old woman choked out, sinking into a deep curtsy. It would be our salvation. Then it is done, Alara said. She turned to a stunned Captain Redan, who stood by the door. Captain, please see to the arrangements immediately. Redan, after a brief, questioning glance at Lysander, who gave a single, firm nod, bowed. At once, Your Majesty. The silence in the hall was absolute as Hilda was led away, weeping with gratitude. Alara sat back down, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had just openly defied the High Council. She had no idea if she had the authority to do so. Lysander leaned close, his voice a whisper for her alone. That was either the bravest thing I have ever witnessed, or the most foolish. Which was it? She whispered back, her hands trembling in her lap. He did not answer immediately. He looked out at the silent, watching court, then back at her, a slow, proud smile touching his lips. It was leadership. The rest of the petition hearing passed in a blur. The other petitioners looked at her with new eyes, with a flicker of something that had been absent before, hope. The council members were quiet, their expressions a mixture of outrage, contemplation, and, in a few cases, something that might have been respect. That evening, as she walked back to her chambers, the whispers that followed her were different. They were no longer just about her clothes or her manners. They were about the mill. They were about the peasant queen who had looked at a broken system and simply stepped over it. Liana was waiting for her in her solar, her arms crossed. You made a spectacle of yourself, she hissed. The court is laughing at you. They are saying you are impulsive and naive. Let them laugh, Alara said, unpinning the heavy crown from her hair and setting it aside with a sigh of relief. At least Hilda's village will have a mill. You cannot just throw the king's money at every problem. Liana argued. You have undermined the entire council. Perhaps the council needed undermining, Alara replied, her voice weary but firm. She looked at her sister, at the familiar spite in her eyes. You can spend your time worrying about what the court thinks of me, Liana. I have a kingdom to learn. She turned her back, signaling the end of the conversation. She had passed her first test. It had not been about a spoon or a curtsy. It had been about a choice, to follow protocol, or to follow her conscience. She had chosen, and the ground had not swallowed her whole. In fact, for the first time since arriving in Silverhold, she felt the ground firm beneath her feet. She was not just surviving the gilded cage. She was beginning to learn how to open the door. The victory of the mill was a fragile shield. It did not stop the whispers, it only changed their tone. Now, they spoke of her as willful, unpredictable, a force to be cautiously observed rather than outright mocked. Lord Valerius and his faction watched her with the wary eyes of strategists recalculating a battlefield. The burden of every decision felt heavier now. She could not be seen as impulsive, yet she could not stand by and do nothing. It was in this tense atmosphere that her family descended upon Silverhold. They arrived not as humble supplicants, but with an air of bruised entitlement, their fine new clothes looking as uncomfortable on them as Alara's silks felt on her. Her father, Orin, trailed behind her mother, Lyra, whose eyes held a calculating gleam as she took in the staggering opulence of the palace. Liana, of course, had already entrenched herself, a source of poison dripping into the court's ear. Their first private audience was a masterpiece of Lyra's particular brand of manipulation. They were in Alara's solar, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the priceless rugs. Alara, my dear, Lyra began, her voice a saccharine simulacrum of maternal concern. To see you here, in this grandeur. It is still so difficult to believe. She sighed dramatically. We have suffered, you know. The shame of your abrupt departure was a heavy cross for your father and I to bear. The village was merciless. Alara said nothing, her hands folded in her lap. She felt the old, familiar pull of guilt, a hook set deep in her childhood. But we're your family, Lyra continued, leaning forward. Blood is blood. And now that you are in a position of such influence, surely you see the opportunity. Your father, a man of business, could be so useful in managing the royal trade routes. And Liana, your own sister, deserves a marriage befitting her station, now that our standing has been so unexpectedly elevated. Orin finally spoke, his voice rough. We are your family, girl. You have a duty to us. The words were a cold splash of reality. They had not come to reconcile. They had come to collect. The cage of her old life was not gone. It had simply been rebuilt with gold, its bars now the chains of familial obligation. My duty, Alara said, her voice dangerously quiet, is to the people of Eldoria. Lyra's mask of concern slipped, revealing the steel beneath. Do not be naive. Your position here is precarious. These nobles, they look down on you. They always will. You need allies. You need us. We are the only ones you can truly trust. Can I? Alara met her mother's gaze directly. Can I trust you, mother? The way I trusted you to value me? The way I trusted you not to humiliate me in front of the entire village? Lyra's face tightened. That was for your own good. To make you see reason. And look where your reason led you, to a deception of monumental proportions. You are lucky that Drifter turned out to be a king, or you would be starving in a ditch. The old wounds tore open, bleeding fresh pain. But this time, Alara did not bleed alone. A presence filled the doorway. The only deception, Lysander's voice cut through the room, cold and sharp as a winter wind, was the one you practiced on your own daughter her entire life. He strode in, having clearly heard enough. He did not look at Alara's parents. His entire focus was on her, a silent question in his eyes. Do you need me to handle this? In that moment, seeing the king who had lied for love standing in defense of her against the family who had claimed to love her while inflicting 1,000 small cruelties, something inside Alara finally, completely, snapped into place. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. This was her battle. She stood, her posture mirroring his innate authority. My husband is correct. You taught me that I was worthless, that I was a burden. You were wrong. It took a king's deception to show me a queen's truth. She looked at her father. You speak of duty. My duty is not to erase your failures or to fund Liana's social climbing. You cast me out with nothing. That decision stands. Lyra sputtered, her face mottled with rage. You ungrateful child. After all we have done for you. What have you done for me? Alara's question was not a shout, but a whisper that carried the weight of a lifetime. You fed me and clothed me and taught me my place was in the dirt. Kale? Lysander, he was the one who taught me to stand. She walked to the door and held it open. You will be provided with comfortable quarters for a fortnight, as is proper for visiting family. After that, you will return to Oakhaven. The crown will not be your treasury. I will not be your pawn. The silence that followed was absolute. Orin looked down at his hands, a flicker of what might have been shame in his eyes. Liana stared with pure, unadulterated hatred. Lyra looked as if she had been physically struck, her entire worldview collapsing. They filed out, defeated. When the door closed, the strength drained from Alara's legs. She leaned against it, trembling. Lysander was at her side in an instant, his hands on her shoulders, turning her to face him. Alara, do not, she whispered, tears finally spilling over. Do not say you are proud of me. Not yet. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried, not for the family she had lost, but for the family she had never had. She wept for the little girl who had believed she was worthless, and for the woman who had just slain that ghost in a room of gold and silk. When her tears subsided, she looked up at him, her face raw but her eyes clear. They were my past, she said, her voice steadier now. You are my future. This kingdom is my future. I see that now. He brushed the tears from her cheeks. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire, he murmured. You have walked through fire your entire life, my love. And you have emerged not just strong, but radiant. That night, for the first time, she did not dream of Oakhaven. She did not dream of her mother's voice or the village square. She dreamed of a mill, rebuilt and turning steadily in a northern village, its rhythm the steady, hopeful heartbeat of a kingdom she was slowly learning to call her own. The echoes of her old life would always be there, but they were no longer chains. They were the foundation upon which a queen was being built. The air in the grand cathedral of Silverhold thrummed with a tension that had nothing to do with the sacred ceremony about to take place. News had come at dawn, carried by a mud-spattered scout on a horse that collapsed upon reaching the palace gates. Alpha Magnus was not just planning, he was marching. His forces, bolstered by rogue wolves and human mercenaries, had crossed the border. War was no longer a specter on the horizon, it was a storm breaking at their doorstep. The coronation, planned for weeks, was now a weapon. We cannot proceed, Lord Valerius argued, his face ashen in the antechamber. Your Majesty, it is too dangerous. The kingdom is under attack. We must focus on mobilization, on strategy, not on a pageant. Lysander stood before a tall mirror, attendants fastening the ceremonial armor of the Alpha King over his dark tunic. It was polished silver, engraved with the wolf and star crest, and it gleamed with a cold, deadly light. "It is precisely because we are under attack that we will proceed, Valerius," he said, his voice flat and final. "Magnus seeks to show us as weak, divided. We will answer by showing him a kingdom united under its king and its newly crowned queen. We will show him our strength is not just in our armies, but in our spirit." His eyes found Alara's across the room. She was being draped in the coronation gown, a masterpiece of sapphire velvet and silver thread that weighed more than her entire wardrobe in Oakhaven. The crown that awaited her was a terrifying thing of platinum and diamonds. She felt a tremor run through her, part fear, part a fierce, defiant resolve. "He is right," she said, her voice clear in the hushed room. All eyes turned to her. "If we delay, if we hide, we confirm his belief that we are afraid. We will hold the coronation. We will show every wolf in Eldoria that their king and queen do not flinch." The ceremony was stripped of its more elaborate flourishes, becoming something harder, sharper, more potent. The cathedral was packed, not just with nobles, but with soldiers in their battle leathers, their faces grim. The air smelled of incense and cold steel. Alara walked down the endless aisle on Lysander's arm, the weight of the gown and the eyes of the kingdom upon her. She did not see the glittering assembly, she saw the faces from the petition hearings, Hilda, the farmer, the widow. She saw the future they were fighting for. At the altar, the high priestess, an ancient wolf with eyes like moonstones, awaited them. The ritual words were spoken, ancient and powerful, binding Lysander to the land and its people once more. Then, the priestess turned to Alara. Alara of the House Blackwood, her voice echoed in the vaulted silence. "Do you swear to uphold the laws of Eldoria? To defend its people from all who would seek to harm them? To guide with wisdom, to rule with justice, and to serve with compassion, from this day until your last breath?" Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Lysander, at her king, her mate, her love. She looked out at the sea of faces, seeing both hope and fear. She thought of the quiet strength she had found in the forest, the defiance she had learned in a dusty square, the compassion forged in a life of hardship. "I swear it," she said, and her voice did not tremble. It rang out, clear and certain, a promise etched in stone. The priestess lifted the platinum crown. As it settled onto Alara's brow, a strange thing happened. It was no longer a weight. It was a part of her. A cool, calm certainty flooded her veins. The fear was gone, burned away in the crucible of this moment. In that instant, a connection snapped into place, not just with Lysander, but with the very land itself. She could feel it, the fear in the border villages, the steady resolve of the soldiers on the walls, the ancient, sleeping power of the mountains. The mate bond with Lysander flared into a brilliant, unbreakable cord of silver light in her soul, and through it, she felt the pulse of the kingdom. She was not just a queen by marriage or by ceremony. She was the Luna Queen of Eldoria, and the land itself recognized her. As they turned to face the congregation, now kneeling before their crowned sovereigns, a messenger burst through the cathedral doors, his chest heaving. "Your Majesties, Magnus's vanguard, they've been sighted at the Blackwater Pass. They'll be at the outer walls by nightfall." A panicked murmur rippled through the crowd. Lysander's face was a mask of cold fury. But it was Alara who spoke, her voice carrying over the rising fear, infused with a newfound, unshakable authority. "Then let them come," she declared, her hand finding Lysander's. "They will find not a kingdom in chaos, but a people united. They will find not a fearful queen, but a Luna who will defend her home. Let every wolf who can hold a weapon report to the walls. Let every heart find its courage. Today, we are not just crowned. We are forged. And we will stand." A roar erupted from the soldiers in the cathedral, a sound of fury and faith that shook the very foundations. The coronation was over. The war had begun. And as Alara stood beside her king, her crown gleaming, she knew that the girl from Oakhaven was gone forever. In her place stood a queen, ready for fire, ready for blood, ready to fight for the kingdom that was now, irrevocably, hers. The battle for Silverhold was not a thing of glorious charges and heroic duels played out on an open field. It was a brutal, grinding siege of stone and sinew, a symphony of screaming metal and snarling wolves under a sky stained with smoke. From the highest tower, Alara watched it all, her heart a drum keeping time with the thunder of catapults. She did not hide in the fortified royal chambers. She walked the battlements, her sapphire gown traded for practical leathers, her crown the only glint of royalty amid the grime and blood. She carried water to the wounded, her calm presence a balm to the young soldiers whose eyes were wide with terror. She did not flinch from the sight of broken bodies, the memory of her own hardships giving her a strength that surprised even herself. "They fight for you, you know," a gravelly voice said beside her. It was Captain Redan, a gash on his forehead still weeping blood. "When the men see you up here, unafraid, it reminds them what they are defending. Not just a king, a queen worth dying for." His words struck a chord deep within her. This was not about a title anymore. It was about the connection she had felt during the coronation, the bond with the land and its people. She was their Luna, and a Luna protects her pack. The turning point came on the third day. Magnus's forces, desperate to break the stalemate, unleashed their secret weapon. A cadre of human hunters, armed with crossbows loaded with silver-tipped bolts, scaled a less guarded section of the wall under cover of darkness. They broke through, their purpose clear: assassinate the king and queen and throw the capital into disarray. Chaos erupted within the inner courtyard. Alara was there, helping to move the wounded when the shouts of alarm went up. She saw the hunters, their faces hard and mercenary, cutting down palace guards with ruthless efficiency. And she saw Lysander, 100 yards away, surrounded by his own circle of foes, unable to reach her. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. But as a hunter turned, his crossbow lifting, his aim settling not on her, but on Lysander's exposed back, the fear vanished. It was replaced by a pure, primal instinct. Protect your mate. A roar tore from her throat, a sound she did not know she could make, raw with power and fury. It was the voice of the Luna. The very air seemed to still. The hunter faltered, his aim wavering for a crucial second. In that second, Alara moved. She did not think. She acted. Grabbing a fallen guard's sword, its weight unfamiliar but its purpose clear, she placed herself between the hunter and her king. "You will not touch him," she snarled, her voice low and guttural, carrying the force of her newfound authority. The hunter laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. He shifted his aim to her. "The peasant queen wants to play at war." He never got to fire. A blur of golden fur slammed into him from the side. Kale, the hunter, the protector, the heart of the king she loved, had broken through his own attackers, his wolf form a terrifying instrument of vengeance. The hunter's scream was cut short. The breach was sealed, the attackers within the walls eliminated, but the moment was seared into the memory of every soldier who witnessed it. They had seen their Luna, crown on her head, standing fearless before an assassin's bolt to defend their king. A new cry went up along the walls, not of fear, but of ferocious pride. For the king, for the queen. The tide turned. Inspired, the defenders of Silverhold fought with renewed, desperate strength. Lysander, fighting now in his powerful wolf form alongside his men, was a whirlwind of destruction, his every move guided by the fierce, protective love for the woman who had just risked everything for him. By dawn, it was over. The forces of Alpha Magnus, broken and leaderless after Lysander himself tore out the traitor's throat in single combat, retreated into the hills. Silence fell over Silverhold, a heavy, exhausted, victorious silence. Alara stood on the blood-streaked battlement, the rising sun painting the battered city in hues of gold and rose. She was weary to her bones, her clothes stained, her hands trembling. But her spirit had never felt more alive. Lysander, shifted back to his human form, covered in grime and gore, came to stand beside her. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, his stormy eyes filled with a love and a reverence so profound it stole her breath. He reached out and gently touched the platinum crown, still perfectly seated in her hair. "When I placed this on your head," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I crowned my queen. But today, Alara, you crowned yourself. In the hearts of every person in this kingdom, you are no longer the girl from Oakhaven. You are their Luna." He took her hand, his grip firm and sure. Below them, the people of Silverhold were emerging, cheering, their voices rising in a single, unified chant. Lysander, Alara, the king and queen. Alara looked out at her people, and felt the truth of his words settle into her soul. The lies, the deception, the pain, the fear, it had all been the fire that tempered her. She was not a queen in spite of her past, but because of it. Her strength was her compassion. Her power was her love for her mate and her kingdom. She turned to Lysander, a true, peaceful smile gracing her lips for the first time since the truth had been revealed. The last shadow of doubt, the last echo of Oakhaven, was gone. "I am home," she whispered, not to the palace, but to him, to the bond that thrummed between them, to the destiny she had finally, fully embraced. He brought her knuckles to his lips, his eyes promising a future of peace, of partnership, of a love that had been tested by war and forged in truth. Together, the Alpha King and his Luna Queen stood watch as the sun rose on a new, united Eldoria. The mocking laughter of her past was a distant memory, silenced forever by the roar of a people who had found their queen, and the quiet, unshakable truth in a queen who had finally found herself. The end.